The Rotoworld Football Podcast crew is here to help you navigate and, most importantly, win your fantasy drafts this year. Gentlemen, Denny Carter, Hayden Winks. I know a lot of people out there want strategies or tips to win their draft. You know, there's not one that just works perfectly for every single draft that you enter. So today I just wanted to talk through a lot of different mindsets, plans that we might have, or maybe even disagree with as we go through or enter these drafts, and hopefully people out there will pick up on some things they like or things they disagree with. Hayden, let's start with one that we want to hammer home each and every year, yet people still disagree with it, and that is waiting on quarterbacks, selecting a late round quarterback. What is the advantage of maybe bypassing a Lamar Jackson or a Patrick Mahomes in the first 2 or 3 rounds and instead waiting on a quarterback to the later rounds?
Well, historically, if you look at where quarterbacks finished and where they were drafted, the drop-off is pretty flat. That means like the quarterback 7 and the quarterback 17, there's not that big of a difference. And that's probably because the quarterbacks throw the ball 30 times each. So there's not going to be that much fluctuation because most quarterbacks are pretty even. And then there's also the thing where you can be streaming quarterbacks. If your league has waiver wires, you can just find quarterbacks who are startable guys in good matchups and start them over like the quarterback 9 on the year. So that's why we want to be waiting on quarterbacks and be drafting running backs, receivers, positions that there's like a big gap between somebody that's good and somebody that's bad.
The opportunity cost of taking a quarterback early is tremendous in one quarterback leagues particularly. I'm not saying that I refuse to draft Mahomes or Jackson anywhere that they may fall, because everybody is a value sometimes. So if they fall well below their ADPs, then I absolutely will consider just grabbing them and just having that position set, having the quarterback spot set. But everything Hayden said rings true. No matter what kind of traditional league you're in, where you can find 5, 6, 7, sometimes even more decent starting quarterbacks on the waiver wire week in and week out. You will find that even people who spend a mid-round pick on quarterback end up working the waiver wire, looking for better options because they are out there.
And this is an absolutely dominant strategy, I think, in people's home leagues. It's a little different in our industry leagues because people just wait way too long on quarterback in some situations. But I think what have been the dominant teams in recent years in your leagues at home have been the ones that waited until, quarterback 12 to draft Patrick Mahomes 2 years ago, or last season, the quarterback 15 to draft that Lamar Jackson. Now, guys, I'm not so sure if there is one name that we can kind of Captain Planet here and unite as one that we can come together and think of outside of that quarterback 10 mark and be like, oh yeah, this is going to be the key to winning your fantasy drafts. Denny, is there one that you keep going to that is outside of that quarterback 10 range?
Well, just generally, if I'm going for like an upside late round quarterback play, I want that quarterback to give me rushing production, because it's, as we've seen many times, is such a cheat code in fantasy football to get that sort of rushing production, both yards and touchdowns from your late round guy. Josh Allen was that last year. I don't know if Tyrod Taylor is going to hold on to the job all year. I kind of doubt it. But we've seen, time and time again, how valuable his rushing production can be in fantasy. So he's someone I really don't mind late in drafts. I think Joe Burrow is also a guy who probably will rush more than maybe people think this year. And then Gardner Minshew is not someone who is afraid to leave the pocket and scramble. Pat Thorman on Twitter today had a great stat about how he actually Minshew scrambled more often than Lamar Jackson last season. So those are 3 guys I just find myself getting a lot late in drafts.
I'm definitely going to second the Joe Burrow thing. If he averaged like 39 rushing yards at LSU last year, if you remove his negative sack yardage totals. The other thing I want to talk about is just maybe there's an exception with Mahomes and Lamar Jackson just because they are totally different types of quarterbacks. We've seen the rushing floor, and Mahomes might be a totally different type of passer. The one thing is I'm not going to reach on them in the second round, but if it's the third round and I've already drafted one of their teammates, then I'm starting to get a little more interested. There's kind of a drop off in the third round this year. So if I've drafted Travis Kelce and then Patrick Mahomes is there, late in the third round, that's kind of the exception I'm willing to take. I'm not going to reach on Dak Prescott, who I love, in the fourth round. Maybe I take Dak Prescott in the sixth round if I've already drafted Amari Cooper or Michael Gallup. So that's the only times I'm going to be drafting one of these top six guys is if I've already drafted one of their teammates.
And there are other quarterbacks to love too. I mean, Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray, and they're going in that sixth, seventh round in a lot of platforms as well. So it kind of just is an area that I tend to avoid, unfortunately, because again, we rank all those quarterbacks so highly, yet going back to your initial point, Hayden, like you're bypassing up someone like Aaron Jones or bypassing up someone like DJ Chark. And instead, if you're taking a quarterback that early, then you're then in round 11 or round 7, that's basically trading Jarvis Landry for DJ Chark or Jarvis Landry for Chris Godwin. And I would much rather be on that Chris Godwin, DJ Chark side of that equation as well. Okay, let's go to our next tip to win your fantasy draft. That is stacking. We have an entire episode dedicated to stacking. So go back on the Rotoworld Football Podcast feed to check that out. But Hayden, going back to you here, why should people factor in stacking? Why should it intrigue them? Because, I think some people might be a little nervous to have that much confidence and that much exposure to one single team and instead want to spread the wealth as much as possible.
Yeah, the thing is we are trying to come in first place in our leagues. We do not care if we come in eighth place. No one remembers the third place team or the fourth place team. Everyone's trying to get first place. So what stacking does is it creates correlation. And basically what I mean is if you draft a wide receiver, for example, in the third round, that means you think his quarterback at least has to be like somewhat good. So if you see that quarterback laying around in the 11th round, pairing him is advantageous because you've already been betting on that offense being good by drafting the wide receiver earlier. So you just want to be pairing a wide receiver with a quarterback, a tight end. I love pairing a tight end with my quarterback because it's kind of two touchdown dependent positions. But you just want one or two pieces attached to the quarterback if possible. And this is especially so the larger your league settings are. So like some of these best ball tournaments where like competing against thousands of teams, you have to have players from the same offenses. And maybe if you're in a 12 team, a 14 team home league, you definitely want to be stacking some guys, and less so if you're in like an 18 league.
Denny, I think go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Hayden is spot on. It increases it gives you some volatility, and volatility can be really good in fantasy. No one wants to finish in the middle of their league, and I tend to embrace draft strategies that will either put me near the bottom or hopefully near the top. So yeah, I mean, stacking. I think stacking can work. It has worked, and there are cheap ways to stack players in fantasy leagues as well. I mean, it makes sense, obviously, if you get a top wide receiver to stack him with his quarterback. It makes all the sense in the world. But there are several, I think, very cheap stacking options that could pay off this year, including someone like Teddy Bridgewater and DJ Moore. You have this is not super cheap, but Juju and Ben Roethlisberger, I think, is a really good one. And then Matt Stafford and Marvin Jones. Marvin Jones is still very cheap, relatively cheap in leagues. Those are three stacks that I think they don't cost a lot of draft capital, but I believe they come with a lot of upside.
Let me double down on that Steelers one because Ben Roethlisberger is going as the quarterback 18. Juju as the wide receiver 12 when last year he was going as a top 10 wide receiver. Deontay Johnson, the wide receiver 36. Heck, Hayden, I'll go all the way down to like James Washington as the wide receiver 78 in a lot of places. Eric Ebron, who they added kind of under the radar this offseason to work the middle of the field, is a tight end 22. And Hayden, you also know that like the Philadelphia Eagles have just had my heart this offseason basically because I think their entire offense is underpriced other than Miles Sanders and Zach Ertz. And that means I'm going after Carson Wentz as the quarterback 9, Jalen Reagor as the wide receiver 45, and Deshaun Jackson as the wide receiver 55. Both of those fit the weight on quarterback, and then you don't have to prioritize a top 2 or 3 round pick at wide receiver, tight end, or running back to complete those stacks. And 3 pieces, I'm totally fine with a 3-piece stack. Let's put it that way.
That's right. Yeah, a little 3-piece nugget. And one of the nuggets could be a running back too. You're betting on offenses here with the stack. It's not just the wide receiver catching a pass from a quarterback. If the quarterback has thrown for 3 touchdowns, that means they're in positive game scripts. that's setting up the running back to have excess carries down the stretch. So bet on offenses.
And going back to your first point about sacks, like let's say you're at the 106 or the 107, you land Clyde Edwards-Helaire in that first round. Then somehow in your league at home, Travis Kelce makes it all the way back to the middle of that second round. And that's when you should reach for Patrick Mahomes in the third round if he's still on the board, right? That 3-person sack to start your season and start your draft, I mean, I don't know how you lose in that scenario. Okay.
Automatic championship.
Just bypass, do not pass go. Okay, let's now move over to a section of the draft, which I think it seems like every single year there's strengths to drafts, right? And this year, to me, it's the wide receivers in rounds 3 through 6. I mean, your Kenny Galladay's, your Allen Robinsons, your DJ Moores, your Mike Evans, and that goes all the way to the group of DK Metcalf, DJ Chark, Cortland Sutton, Keenan Allen, Tyler Lockett, even past that, like Michael Gallup and Will Fuller. Hayden, I know basically your entire offseason strategy has been to attack this group.
Yeah, definitely. Earlier in the offseason, I had a couple pieces looking at historical ADPs, and then I looked at does zero running back work? And we'll get into that in a second. But the main points here is I looked at average fantasy points between running backs and receivers, and then I looked at the win rates. And a win rate is basically how often you win your league on average based on like where you're drafting these players. So with running backs versus receivers, the gap between them is the widest between picks like 25th overall and 75th overall. That's about the round 3 through round 6, round 7 of your league. And because the gap is widest there, that's when you want to be attacking wide receivers over the running backs in that range. And just to put a bow on this, the teams who've drafted their third receiver in rounds 4 or 5, their win rate's about 9.5%, which kind of seems small, but that's actually pretty significant. Teams that draft their third receiver in the 7th round or later, that win rate drops down to like 6.8%. So that's a pretty wide gap just based off of where you're drafting your third receiver. So the rule I've just been applying this year is if you don't have your 4th receiver by round 7, you're basically donating your money. So prioritize your receivers early. Grab 4 of them, grab 5 of them within the first 8 rounds, and then we can attack some of these zero RB candidates that we'll get to in a second later in the draft to kind of round out your roster.
Denny, are you donating money this offseason?
No. I usually have my 4th wide receiver in the 4th round. So that's right. I think that, zero RB, just to preface this conversation, because I think it's important, is most viable, I think, when you're talking about PPR leagues where you can start up to 4 wide receivers in your lineup. There's really no reason to approach a draft from a zero RB standpoint if you can only start 2 or 3 wide receivers and it's not a PPR. I think you're right about those receivers in the middle rounds, or not really middle, but that rounds 3 to 6 or 7. I think, a guy like, Sutton, Galladay, Chark, those guys certainly have big seasons in their range of outcomes, potentially monster seasons and definitely big volume seasons for all 3 of those guys potentially. So I don't mind that approach at all. And I end up getting, those guys even in a zero RB approach. The gap that Hayden talked about is real, and it's concerning when you find yourself in rounds 5, 6, 7, 8 looking for a running back. I do, okay, I will pluck a running back from those rounds sometimes, but getting down to the lower rounds, the double-digit rounds, and getting zero RB candidates from there, I think can give you the upside, the kind of winning upside for that kind of roster.
Yeah, we often talk about how quarterback has never been deeper in fantasy football. I would advocate that wide receiver potentially has never been deeper, just because the volume that the league is having now, passing, that technically second wide receivers on teams, even third wide receiver teams, are seeing a boatload of targets, like 80 something targets. So the volume is definitely there for like even 3, once again, wide receivers on a single team to be fantasy viable. Denny, let's transition over to zero running back. I'm so glad we have you on here, because this is a statement that has worked in the past, definitely a strategy that has worked in the past. for a lot of drafters has somehow transitioned into a bit of a meme at times this offseason. But I know, at least for me, when I'm comfortable in drafts, it's because I get 2 workhorse featured backs at the top. You know, a Dalvin Cook and an Austin Eckler, a Miles Sanders and a Nick Chubb potentially, right? Because then when I drop all the way down to round 8, where your Jordan Howards are going, or even freaking Tariq Cohen is going in the 8th round. Like, I want nothing to do with those names. So I want you to tell me potentially why I'm wrong and why I should be embracing zero running back and waiting on the position even more.
So I see where you're going with the fact that there's more pass volume, that there are a lot of potentially high volume wide receivers available in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round, like I just said, So I certainly acknowledge that. I will say that data says that historically we're not very good at identifying upside wide receivers in that range. And, so that could be an issue, even if, we believe, and I include myself in this too, this wide receiver is being vastly undervalued. More often than not, we're wrong about that. Like, we end up not being correct on who will emerge from that area. But I think in the approach that you're talking about, taking 1 or 2 running backs to start off, it definitely makes you feel more comfortable. Like I sometimes want that comfort. I want that warm blanket. To say I got my high volume running backs. I feel good. I feel okay about myself. But I find that when you leave a draft with a bunch of wide receivers that you can start on any given week, when your wide receiver 4 it would be someone else's wide receiver 2. I think that you leave the draft not feeling comfortable, but knowing that this team might have some pop.
Hayden, Denny basically just called us the Linus of this Peanuts world, just trying to carry around our blanket this entire time. What's your thoughts on this, Hayden? Because I know that you're with me, where again, it's like that pillow we can lean our head against, where we know we've got the running back position taken care of, and I don't have to worry about the Darrell Hendersons of the world.
Well, I'm kind of like in the middle of both. I believe in all of these like zero RB theories. Like, the volatility, you want to take advantage of that. And there's no position that has more volatility than running backs, because the injury rates are higher. And when a first round running back gets injured, a backup running back is now vaulted into like the top 15 overall running backs. If a first round receiver gets injured, Russell Gage is not becoming a top 15 receiver. Right. So you want to take advantage of that. So I think when I was doing my research here, I've came out with a strategy. I'm calling it bimodal RB. Who cares what I call it? Basically, draft 2 running backs early or 1 running back early, and stop drafting running backs. Like, people refuse to log off. You have to log off. Stop drafting all these running backs in the 3rd, 5th, 4th, 5th, 6th round and keep pounding it. Draft 2, you're betting on those guys staying healthy. If one of them gets hurt, guess what? You lost. Yep. But you have to try to win. If you draft 2 of them, stop drafting them, and then draft the zero RB guys, you're putting yourself in a position where if you are right with those first 2 running backs, definitely not granted, and you hit on some of these zero RB guys, all of a sudden you have a completely stacked roster. So I'm okay with drafting a running back, most likely 2 running backs in the first 2 rounds, but then you have to stop drafting it. Like, you have to wait until like the 11th, 12th, 13th round. And I think the biggest thing is people draft 2 running backs and then they're like, ooh, I kind of like David Montgomery in round 5. Ooh, right. Jordan Howard in round 9. And then you've all of a sudden invested too much into the position. Draft 2, log off, then wait for Darrell Henderson, Chase Edmonds in rounds 12, 13, and 14.
Yeah, I may get kicked out of the Church of Zero RB for saying this, but I'll have to beg for their forgiveness. But I don't hate if you have a top 4 or 5 pick getting that running back and then just hammering wide receiver from there on out. Maybe you end up with Kamara, say, and then you draft 4 wide receivers in a row, maybe more, honestly. And don't, like Hayden, like you're saying, don't be tempted to say, well, maybe I'll dabble with a David Montgomery. I'll dabble with, this like seemingly high volume guy who actually never does anything with his volume. So I don't hate that at all.
Yeah, if you get the 101, you can't just go into your draft being like, no, I'm not taking Christian McCaffrey, right? It's something at the end of round one where, if you look at, I don't know, Joe Mixon, you're like, I don't believe in this Bengals offense, despite how many, good offensive weapons that they have because their offensive line is so poor. Or like if Josh Jacobs there, you just want to bypass. Well, I guess tight end would fit in zero running back as well. Denny, let's outline your perfect zero running back strategy. Okay, the perfect zero running back team to start. And I'll nominate a few. Like, let's say, I don't know, you're at the 7th overall selection after McCaffrey, Saquon, Zeke, Kamara, Dalvin Cook, Clyde Edwards-Helaire have all gone off the board. And you don't want like a running back that doesn't have pass catching volume. There you can take Michael Thomas. Then like round 2, Julio Jones. Round 3, DJ Moore. Round 4, Calvin Ridley. How does that sound?
Sounds good. I mean, that sounds excellent. I will take that. Yeah. So you end up with Calvin Ridley as your wide receiver 4, which sounds bananas, right? I mean, just in a vacuum, that doesn't sound right. And it's an enormous luxury. And if you can hit on just one, maybe two of those be candidates, and you're set. You're good.
So when we get to your first running back, if you do go with 4 wide receivers to start, the likes of Kareem Hunt, does that pique your interest, or one of those rookie running backs and DeAndre Swift and Cam Akers? Does that really give you the confidence level of your first running back off the board?
I don't know about Akers. I feel like there's just too much uncertainty that uncertainty has not been fully incorporated into his ADP. I don't think. I guess Swift is fine. I mean, he seems to shape up as a guy who, won't lose touches. Won't be game script dependent at all, which is a really nice thing to get if you can get a running back in the 5th round like that. And then the other guy you mentioned, Akers and Swift, and who else?
I think Kareem Hunt or Raheem Mostert. I'm just looking kind of in the middle of that 5th round area where some running backs are going. Right.
Yeah. I mean, Hunt will have standalone value. And that's important because zero RB is usually built for the long haul, but you need somebody to start. Like you have to fill in those running back spots. Usually 2. So having a guy like Kareem Hunt, he's not going to lead the backfield in carries or in touches, most likely. I guess that's somewhat possible with Chubb's concussion issue right now. But I think that he's a solid process pick.
And then just attack that running back position after week 1, after week 2, after week 3, when all the waiver wire, John Daigle writing that for us this year, comes around. All right. I think we've come to a nice, little agreement here with the strategy we have heading in.
Just stop drafting running backs like beyond the first 2. Like the whole thing with zero RB is like we're investing too much into a position that has a high bust rate. I'm okay with taking on some of that bust rate in the 2nd round, but I'm done after that. And I think that's kind of where Denny and I align. You don't want to invest too much, whether it's 1, 2, or 0 early. That doesn't really matter too much. You just can't draft 4 in the first 5 rounds.
Yeah, I will wait until all the way round 9 to get Latavius or round 10 to get Latavius. Like he's my favorite running back 3 after I invested 2 early on. All right, let's move on to talk about factoring in early season schedules. It's something John Daigle has talked a lot about this summer. It's something I have like a back and forth with myself, like an internal argument, right? Because one, it factors in last year, I think way too much because we see teams drastically change once they start in week 1 and then drastically change once again in the performance that they showed in week 1 into week 2. I mean, how often, like the Cincinnati Bengals last year, like they gave the Seattle Seahawks hell in week 1 and they shriveled up into like their shell the rest of the season and were just absolutely awful. So it's one where I understand it if we look at it now and say, oh yeah, we know exactly what these teams are going to be defensively. So we might want to attack like the Buffalo Bills. So have the Jets in week 1, Miami in week 2, Raiders in week 4, Jets again in week 7. That sounds easy, Hayden, but is it something that we can actually put into practice that is successful?
Well, I think this is, you're only factoring in early season schedules if there is a waiver wire. And what I mean by that is you're kind of only doing this for the onesie positions. I mean, quarterbacks, tight ends, defenses, and kickers, where you're picking up a quarterback, like you're streaming quarterbacks like we mentioned earlier. You need good matchups. So if you can't pick up and drop quarterbacks, then it doesn't matter about the early season schedule. But for example, Daniel Jones, Jimmy G, they're kind of being drafted in the same range. You have to draft Garoppolo over Daniel Jones if you're going to be planning on starting him, and you can go to the waiver wire later. The 49ers in the first 3 games, they play the Cardinals, the Jets, and the Giants. And then on the flip side for Daniel Jones, they play the Steelers, Bears, and 49ers. And Josh, I hear your point about not knowing which defenses are going to be good. But like at the tails, we kind of have a good idea. Like I'm pretty sure the Jets defense is going to be horrible. I'm pretty sure the Steelers defense is going to be good. So you want to play it a little bit, but I wouldn't like completely be drafting, I don't know, like your fifth wide receiver just because he has an early season schedule that opens up for him.
Right. You're not even going to be able to play that receiver in your lineup. So yeah, I mean, it comes down to like you said, the onesie positions, quarterback, tight end, defense, and of course kicker. Don't forget kicker. Where you know these positions are very replaceable, and so once you're done with that early season schedule, say a quarterback has a nice first 2 or 3 games, and then his schedule toughens up, you're done. You drop him, you get somebody else. I don't really care too much when I'm looking at running backs and wide receivers. I don't fret about their schedules, because if you factor that into your running back and wide receiver selections, I think you're definitely overthinking it.
Let's move on to another topic we've discussed a lot this summer, Hayden. That is how offensive coordinators, how play callers react in neutral and negative game script situations. On the last episode, we talked about the Rams, that when they are drastically behind on the scoreboard, they just abandon the run and they throw the football. Meanwhile, we've seen other head coaches, depending on their quarterback situation or the other talent on their roster, or just like their innate belief in how football should be played, want to run a lot even when they're behind on the scoreboard. We're talking about you, Shadi, up in Seattle. So, Hayden, do you factor in this at all in your decision-making when constructing a fantasy team?
This is definitely something that you can do it a little bit. I mean, just in general, you're kind of taking a two-fold approach here. You have to look at what the tendencies are. So, like, for example, like you said with the Rams are going to pass the ball more when they're trailing at a much higher rate than the rest of the league. So if we think the Rams are going to be worse this year, then you should be drafting these pass catchers because they're going to be passing the ball more. So I don't do this too much for season-long leagues when I'm like doing a draft. Maybe there's like some tinkering I do, but during the season, like when I'm writing my fantasy forecast preview column, this is megally important because you'll know if a team's down or a 10-point underdog. You have to know how the team reacts when they're trailing. So this is more of a week-to-week thing more than a season-long thing. But there are a few things, and then the next step is not just what the team's doing, but also what a certain player is doing. So the classic example is Josh Jacobs. When the Raiders had a lead last year, he was getting like 35% of the Raiders' touches. When they were trailing, that dropped down to like 22, 21%. So that gap is notable. And that's why when you're talking about setting a DFS lineup, you want, obviously, with the Raiders projected to win, that's when you want to play Jacobs, not when they're projected to lose.
Yeah, I mean, game script. Yeah, we can look at the weekly Vegas lines and get some sort of understanding of what the likely game script would be. And I think it comes into play, just getting back to onesie positions. If you have to really go deep at say tight end on a given week, say your regular tight end is hurt or on a bye week, then you attach that tight end, or you're hoping to get a tight end who's attached to an offense who will have to throw a lot. And if we know the tendencies of an offensive coordinator or a certain team, that when they're down, they will drop back to pass early and often, then I think that gives you a small edge. Another way to do it is to look at teams with high implied totals for tight end purposes.
And it's not just something that is 1-to-1 year over year. Like I'm looking at the Colts right now, who were 24th in pace in neutral situations, like almost last in the league in pass percent in neutral situations. Well, we don't know if Frank Reich did that because he had Jacoby Brissett at quarterback last year, and if he's going to do the exact same thing with Phillip Rivers this year. But, oftentimes a lot of the fantasy teams that we really enjoy, the ones that we want to invest in, still like to throw the football in even situations, in neutral situations.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with both of you that it's a week to week more than looking at it from the start of the season on. But I'm even looking at this now, Hayden. I mean, you sent us these charts. I didn't realize the Patriots were first in pace last year in neutral situations. They were like 8th in pass percentage in neutral situations. I mean, if Julian Edelman can stay healthy, if N'Keal Harry can learn how to separate, Mohamed Sanu even, Cam Newton, all those guys look like values right now because of this.
Yeah, there's personnel changes that we have to factor in, like you said with the Colts. That's the perfect example. I think the Colts are going to pass the ball more. They're going to have more confidence in Phillip Rivers more than they had with Jacoby Brissett. The other team that is completely flown under the radar is Washington. Last year, the coaching changes are just so drastic. And if you're looking at neutral situation pace, Washington was 31st last year. Neutral situation pass rate, they were 30th, and then pass attempts, they were 28th. Bring in the Carolina offensive coordinator, those same metrics, they were 5th, 4th, and 2nd. So I think that Washington's going to pass the ball a lot more, and that's why we had Terry McLaurin as our consensus must-draft player this year.
Yeah, Bill Callahan basically came in his press conference said, yeah, you run the ball to win games. So that is not surprising at all, Hayden Winks, to see how.
And did Washington win games? Like I can't remember.
No, but somehow Adrian Peterson still looked like he was 27 years old. All right, let's close it out with this, talking about running backs. Running back insurance. So often, starting back on this conversation, investing early in backs, people get afraid that, what happens if I select Alvin Kamara and he goes down in week 2? I'm screwed. My season is over. Does that mean I need to draft Latavius Murray in round 7? The same thing could be said for Derrick Henry. And who the heck is his running back insurance? Denny, what's your view on selecting the primary backup to some of these top running backs out there, just for, again, that comfort level and having them on your bench?
Right. Just generally, I'm against it. But I'm particularly against it when you're talking about having to handcuff a first-round running back with an 8th-round running back or a 9th-round running back. What you're doing basically is you're undercutting your roster's upside. Where you could take a wide receiver or another team's running back with that 8th or 9th round pick. You're taking instead Latavius Murray because, again, like you said, Josh, you're afraid of a Kamara injury. Just philosophically, a fear-based approach to creating a fantasy football team is not the best. And but beyond that, it doesn't make any sense if you want a team that will score a lot of fantasy points, and that's what we're trying to do. Then using that much draft capital on one backfield is a problem. I don't hate the idea of handcuffing a first-round running back if the insurance is available in the 10th, 11th, 15th round. I think if the running back insurance is available, then I think that it's okay. But generally, you want to get other people's running back insurance.
Yeah, just to get through this therapy, we're all scared. If your first round running back gets hurt, you are not winning your league. Like just understand that. Like, don't be scared of it. It's just the reality of the situation. And I agree with Denny. You want to be drafting other insurance backs, because if your 2 running backs stay healthy and all of a sudden you get an injury to another running back and then you have his backup already, now you have 3 really strong running backs. So that's the approach I want. And of course, the bigger fields, if you're in these huge best ball tournaments, you definitely do not want to be drafting your backups to your own running backs just because you're limiting your upside. But yeah, the other debate with this whole thing is, do you draft a pure insurance type? I'm talking about Chase Edmonds, Or do you draft somebody that might have some standalone value, but not as much of a ceiling? So the classic example this year would be like Kerryon Johnson. For me personally, I think that there's a higher chance that Kerryon Johnson outscores Chase Edmonds this year, but there's a way higher chance that you're actually winning your league because you have Chase Edmonds on your roster compared to Kerryon Johnson. So when you're talking about like the 9th to like 13th, 14th round in drafts, these are the decisions you're making. And I found myself finding the Chase Edmonds, maybe a Darrington Evans way, way, way later in the draft, rather than somebody that might average 8 fantasy points.
And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Hayden, but mainly you're talking about best ball with that, right? Like if it was a season-long format, I don't think you would necessarily hang on supposedly to Darrington Evans for 16 weeks with him doing absolutely nothing on your bench. Like that's what it is for me. Like I never want anyone on my bench that is going to put up goose eggs every single week. I would much rather have someone that has some ceiling is a weird term here because if there is an injury for Derrick Henry, then maybe his backup gets it. But also, we've tried to predict backups in the past, and it has just completely flopped and failed on us. Like either a team comes in that week and just plucks like Devontae Freeman off the street, and he'll come in and get 23 carries, and that guy we've been hanging on to just is an absolute zero once again for you. It factors in someone who is unproven and is not talented enough to think like, oh yeah, the coaches absolutely believe in him. Like the example I keep going back to, I don't know why people are so sure that like Reggie Bonifant is the running back insurance to Christian McCaffrey. I'll tell you, if Christian McCaffrey gets hurt, 1, the Panthers are going to absolutely stink. And 2, it could be Mike Davis. It could be some veteran that they just get off the street. CJ Anderson once again. And he's a starter. And like the same thing for Boston Scott and Miles Sanders, so on and so forth. Like I just don't know if I have the confidence unless the names are Latavius Murray, Alexander Mattison, Tony Pollard, and Chase Edmonds. Like those are the 4 I really like. And other than that, really unsure about the rest.
I agree. The Chase Edmonds is the one. Here's another general rule. If you didn't draft Chase Edmonds in your fantasy league, that means you aren't the smartest person in your fantasy league. So just draft Chase Edmonds and log off.
It's the anti-Leonard Fournette.
Exactly.
Okay. I think that is going to cover it. A handful of tips for all of you out there to hopefully win your fantasy draft. Again, we are not saying to follow each and every one of these. Hopefully we outline them appropriately for all of you to consider and implement in some of your fantasy drafts this year. We also want to help you win. That's the point of this. And the best way to go and do that is to go over to rotoworld.com/edge for our premium products. And we have projections for every single type of scoring. If your league has weird scoring, you can enter the point values in there and it'll spit out rankings and projections just for your league. We have positional tiers. We have all different type of mocks, a cheat sheet you can print out, even our magazine that you can print out and take with you. The best way to do that, once again, rotoworld.com/edge, and to get $10 off the annual subscription, which is just $4 a month. Enter promo code FBPOD10.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.